Okay, so I finished reading the second Jack Reacher book ever published. There's 20 plus of them now, but this is number two. It's called Die Trying. It was a reread. I read it years ago, but I wanted to read it again before doing a video. And there's a running thing with Reacher in a lot of the books where he kind of tells people, his mother used to say, trouble follows you everywhere. And it's really true in every book. Trouble just seems to find Reacher. It's just part of his life. He really just wants to be left alone, but somehow it just sort of follows him. So it really does kind of follow him everywhere he goes. This time, Reacher is in Chicago. He's walking along on the street. He sees a woman who dropped her dry cleaning. She's walking with a cane. She has knee problems. So, of course, Reacher stops being polite, stops to help her pick up her laundry, hands it to her. Well, it turns out she was about to be kidnapped. So Reacher kind of got swept up with it. It's kind of an interesting take. So she is a FBI agent. The woman who was kidnapped is an FBI agent who specializes in financial crimes. There's a lot more to her than that. We'll get to that in a minute. But I found that kind of interesting because the first book the first book in the Reacher series was all about counterfeiting. So it's kind of like Lee Child going back to his roots and just kind of throwing that in because there was a little bit of discussion about what she does, and that was kind of an interesting little thing to just kind of see him going back to his roots a little bit there on the financial crimes. But it was kind of a cool tag. But that wasn't the main point of the book. The woman in this case turns out to not only be an FBI agent, but she's the daughter of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the goddaughter of the president of the United States. So, usually a high target type of individual, which is an interesting concept because, as we look around the world we live in and we ask, oh, why is all this security necessary? Why is all this expense necessary? Well, especially for the families of people who run for office, or hold these high profile positions, they become targets. And it's not their fault that, their parents or loved ones have this job. I mean, they didn't really ask for it. They're just kind of along for it. And yet they can become targets. And in this case, yeah, it was an interesting kind of thing to have her be kidnapped, not just because of her job, but mostly because of who her dad and godfather were. So, it had nothing to do with the fact that she was an FBI agent. That just sort of plays into the story because, of course, FBI, when one of their own is captured, you have to go off and the FBI instantly gets involved, right? It's a kidnapping case of an FBI agent. There is no, hey, who gets jurisdiction over this one? This is an FBI op from the very beginning. And Lee Child goes to great lengths in the beginning of the story to kind of show the sacrifice of men and women in these organizations go through in their lives outside of work. Because, you don't get paid a ton. And you do work very long hours. You do kind of have to call home on a moment's notice and go, hey, I'm going to be at work until 2 a.m. I'm going to be busy for a week. I'm out, and you get kind of no warning. And it really does take a toll on your personal life. And that toll on your personal life can result in things like broken marriages. Broken marriages, of course, can lead to expenses. That leads to bribable FBI agents, right? Which kind of is this weird circle because the FBI did have some moles in this case. Now, when they do get to their ultimate destination, by then Reacher's kind of figured out who she is, but he can't figure out what the heck. It took a while for the story to figure out why she's been kidnapped, other than who her dad is. Well, there's this group of militia that wanted her because they wanted to secede from the United States. We're like, forget it, we're done, we're out. The militia leader was this Montana militia was like, okay, we're going to declare our own country and we're going to declare independence, and we want to have this prisoner so that when we declare independence we have a bargaining chip to kind of play with. And there's always some question about, hey, am I going to leave the country or not? Every election cycle we see it again. Well, this group actually in the fictional setting wanted to go do it. And it was kind of interesting to read this book now because you see a lot of news about things going on in the election cycle. And some of the complaints of the militia were things like, people get to vote, but we don't really, the outcome of the election doesn't really depend on us. Well, if you have gerrymandering and other stuff, you can kind of see their argument that a lot of elections have been kind of rigged for one party or another, not for one person or another, but they kind of have been sort of set for, okay, that's a Democrat district, that's a Republican district, and it's kind of hard for them to flip based on gerrymandering. And up at the federal level, things just get really weird on elections. So yeah, the tirade that the militia goes on, you can kind of empathize with because they have some good points, right? They kind of get along with they kind of get into your head a little bit with like, okay, they actually have a good point there. And they brought up things like, well, the United Nations is kind of running the world, banks run the world, rich people run the world. And you're like, okay, I kind of sympathize. And then all of a sudden, of course, like most conspiracy groups, they ride it completely off the rails, where the militia group is convinced that every baby born in the United States is microchipped, and the government follows everybody everywhere and knows your every action, and they've got the documents to prove it. They always have the documents to prove it. You know, all these microchip theories. Yes, I know there's a group that is creating microchips that can work now. Elon Musk is running that group. But this group went a whole lot further. It's like, no, the reason they take your baby away from you at the hospital is not to clean them, it's to microchip them and to, put transmitters and all kinds of stuff. It just, it's where the militia, of course, wrote it off the rails. Um, Now, the FBI agent in this case, of course, turns out to be kind of difficult to keep as a prisoner because she's been trained for that. Reacher, of course, being Reacher, when you take him prisoner, good luck, right? Because he's Reacher. But as I read through this one, it kind of made me think a lot about Reacher as a character and what Lee Child was trying to create when he built this character up across 20 plus books. And in this book, it kind of comes across, and that's my first edition copy of it, the first American edition. In this book, it kind of comes across a little more kind of bluntly that what Lee Child has really built in this Reacher character is sort of a much bigger, physically, version of sort of a modern day Sherlock Holmes crossed with maybe James Bond. Because you can't keep him down. He always finds his way out of trouble, and he can always solve anything kind of in his head, right? So it's very reminiscent of Sherlock Holmes and James Bond crossed over. I don't know that he was intentionally doing that, but the character kind of, at least in my head, kind of came across that way, or starting to come across that way more and more as I reread through this whole series. Um, but of course, when they get to the militia camp, Reacher discovers not everybody's there voluntarily. So, of course, trying to bust up the militia camp and escape with the FBI agent after the FBI shows up. And, of course, the military her dad gets involved because chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Hello. He has some pull. Reacher being Reacher, of course, helps solve the whole problem in a very entertaining and interesting way. But Lee Child's reading style really comes more to fruition in this one, more than it did in the first book, in Killing Floor. He has a real talent, at least in this one, for making you feel sympathy, empathy, and even hatred of different characters in the book. He really does make the characters come to life, something that, sometimes authors will come, certain characters will come across very flat, but every character in the book that was, played a role that had meaning, came across very three-dimensionally, and you could either feel sympathy for that character, empathy for that character, you just flat out hated him. But you had some sort of emotional response. At least I did. I felt some sort of emotional response to those characters. So Lee Child really kind of, his talent really kind of, I think, is more on display in this book than it was in the first one. Yeah, that's it. It is a absolute great read. If you get the opportunity, I would certainly do it. Like most of Lee Child stuff, they're not long reads. You can get through it pretty quickly, but it is very, very enjoyable. So a definite page turner, highly recommended. Pick it up if you haven't had the chance. I'm sure it's on Kindle, Audible, hardcover, softcover, everywhere you want to find it. It's probably out there. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to keep rereading through the whole series, but I think the next on my list is a different author. So I like to alternate authors just so I don't get bored. But we'll see you on the next video. Everybody have a great day.